Red Onion State Prison. Perched in the remote mountains of Virginia, it was built for inmates too violent or notorious for any other facility. Here, isolation isn't a threat. It's a daily reality. Yet even behind double doors and steel cages, fists still fly. Whispers travel through vents, and survival becomes a dark art. This is the untold, factual story of how men endure the nation's most feared supermax. Opened in 1998 in the Appalachian coal fields of Wise County, Red Onion State Prison was Virginia's first super-maximum security facility. Officials designed it to house the state's most dangerous inmates, the men who had stabbed rivals in general population, orchestrated riots, or assaulted staff at other prisons. Transfer here was rarely a surprise. It was a warning. According to the Virginia Department of Corrections' own records, most prisoners sent to Red Onion had accumulated a history of disciplinary infractions and gang-related violence at lower security units. The physical setting reinforces that message. Surrounded by miles of forest and steep ridges, the compound rises like a fortress. Layers of razor wire, perimeter roads patrolled by armed guards, and surveillance towers equipped with high-powered cameras. Inside, each housing pod is a double-tiered concrete block with individual cells measuring roughly 7 by 12 feet. The cells include solid steel doors with narrow windows, food slots, and small vents that connect to a central air system, vents that later became lifelines for conversation. For incoming inmates, the reception process is deliberately intimidating. Former prisoners interviewed by NPR in 2016 recalled being shackled at the wrists and ankles, escorted through multiple electronic gates, and photographed for security files before being assigned to segregation. Unlike intake at a typical prison, there is no orientation to programs or orc assignments. Red Onion's focus is on control. Inmates are immediately placed in single-man cells, spending 23 hours a day locked in. Even under such restrictions, violence did not vanish. Investigative reports by the Virginian Pilot and Human Rights Watch documented dozens of incidents between 2009 and 2016 in which inmates fought during brief recreation periods, clashed with officers during cell extractions, or attacked each other while being escorted in handcuffs. Some altercations were spontaneous. Others were planned through smuggled notes known as kites, or via shouted messages through the vent system. One former prisoner described the rec pens, small outdoor cages about the size of a parking space, as dog runs, explaining that men could see each other, posture, and exchange insults even from separate cages. The psychological impact of arrival was immediate. Robert L. DeLuca, a criminal justice researcher who has studied Virginia's supermax units, noted that Red Onion represents the end of the line. Inmates perceive that every infraction here can result in indefinite segregation. That perception reinforces a cycle. Men who already feel cornered act out, which in turn justifies keeping them in isolation longer. The 2012 settlement in Porter v. Clark, a lawsuit challenging conditions at Red Onion and Wallens Ridge, its sister prison, confirmed that some inmates had spent more than a decade in solitary with minimal review of their status. Survival strategies began on day one. Prisoners learned to use rolled-up magazines or toothpaste caps to fish notes under cell doors, sliding them along strings of torn bed sheets to neighboring cells. Others developed elaborate vent codes. One cough meant yes, two coughs meant no. Shouting across tiers at night became another form of contact, even though officers wrote disciplinary charges for disruptive no jurisdictions. According to NPR's reporting, some men credited these improvised communications with preserving their sanity. "If you can hear a voice, you're still human," one said. This combination of engineered isolation and underground communication defined the first stage of life at Red Onion. It was not yet about rehabilitation or programming. It was about establishing mental footing in a place designed to erase it. For new arrivals, the question was never simply, how do I do my time, but how do I avoid being broken before my time is up? That question sets the stage for everything that follows. The fights, the punishments, and the long struggle to retain identity inside Virginia's harshest prison. Life at Red Onion does not mellow after intake. It hardens. By the mid-2000s, the prison had become a symbol of Virginia's zero-tolerance approach to violence. Nearly every cell in the main units housed someone on some form of segregation status: administrative, disciplinary, or intensive management. Officially, these tiers were meant to reduce conflict. In practice, they created a pressure cooker. Investigative files obtained by the Virginian pilot in 2016 revealed dozens of use-of-force incidents during cell extractions. These occur when a prisoner refuses to exit his cell for a search, medical appointment, or transfer. Teams of officers in riot gear, helmets, shields, body armor, line up outside the door while a sergeant fires a burst of pepper spray through the food slot. Once the door opens, officers rush in to pin the inmate, cuff him, and haul him out. Even restrained, men have been known to spit, kick, or headbutt during the struggle. Former Warden Tracy Ray acknowledged to reporters that a high percentage of our population is assaultive, but argued that we have procedures in place to protect staff. Those procedures didn't stop violence between inmates either. Red Onion's recreation yards are not grassy fields, but chain-link dog runs, separated by fences. In theory, prisoners never share a cage, but transport times do, or malfunctions, or staff errors occasionally bring two rivals into proximity. In 2016, Human Rights Watch documented a case where an inmate slashed another with a sharpened piece of plastic while both were handcuffed in the corridor. Another report described men fashioning weapons from toothbrushes, plastic trays, or metal scraps pried from vents. Communication is the key to both conflict and survival. Through the vent system, prisoners trade warnings about upcoming shakedowns, share legal advice, or send coded threats. One former inmate told NPR, "You can't see who's on the other end, but you learn voices. It's like being on a prison radio." Some men use kite lines, strings of sheets or shoelaces, to ferry food, contraband, or written notes between cells on the same tier. Staff routinely confiscate these items, but as one guard put it anonymously, "You can't stop human ingenuity." For prisoners who want to avoid violence, adaptation becomes an art form. Interviews conducted by the Virginia Interfaith Center found that some men adopted extreme politeness towards staff, addressing officers as sir or ma'am, complying with orders instantly, and keeping their cells spotless. Others used mental routines, memorizing books, composing letters they could never send, or doing hundreds of push-ups to burn off tension. One man told the center's chaplain that he timed his breathing to the hum of the ventilation fan to stay calm during lockdowns. The stakes for missteps are high. Under Red Onion's step-down program, inmates can theoretically earn their way out of solitary by demonstrating good behavior. But any infraction, refusing a meal tray, covering a cell window, shouting at an officer, can reset the clock. The Porter v. Clark litigation revealed that some men spent years in segregation for nonviolent rule violations. Prison officials defend the system as necessary to manage the worst of the worst, but critics argue it entrenches a cycle of despair. Once labeled a segregation inmate, it becomes harder to get programming, parole recommendations, or transfers to lower security facilities. Mental health consequences are visible. Court filings from 2012-2016 include affidavits from psychologists who evaluated Red Onion prisoners reporting hallucinations, self-mutilation, and suicide attempts. In one widely cited case, a man with a documented psychiatric disorder was kept in isolation for more than a decade, his cell covered in feces and papers. The federal judge overseeing the settlement required the Department of Corrections to improve mental health screening and offer more out-of-cell time to those diagnosed with serious illnesses. And yet, amid this grim reality, stories of resilience emerge. A former gang member interviewed by the Roanoke Times described how he stopped participating in fights by taking correspondence courses and writing poetry. Another prisoner used his hour of recreation to tutor a cellmate through the fence, shouting math problems across the gap. These fragments of humanity, tiny acts of learning, teaching, or self-discipline, are what keeps some men from succumbing completely to Red Onion's isolation. If Chapter 1 was about the shock of arrival, Chapter 2 shows the long grind of surviving segregation day after day. It's a hidden battlefield, no open riots, but a constant way of nerves, routines, and improvisation. This is where reputations harden, alliances shift through vents and kites, and men decide whether they will fight the system, fight each other, or fight simply to keep their minds intact. By the early 2010s, the criticism of Red Onion's endless isolation was no longer coming just from advocacy groups. Federal courts, local journalists, and even some corrections officials began questioning whether permanent segregation was making the prison safer or more dangerous. In response, the Virginia Department of Corrections introduced a formal step-down program in 2013. On paper, it was a path for prisoners to earn their way back to general population. In reality, it became another gauntlet of rules, paperwork, and psychological tests. Under the program, each inmate in segregation receives a behavioral plan that outlines small privileges they can gain at each level: an extra hour of recreation, a personal radio, the chance to eat with another prisoner in a secure booth. To move up, they must complete packets of cognitive behavioral exercises and maintain spotless disciplinary records for months at a time. Prisoners who reach the top tier may be transferred to a special transition pod at Wallens Ridge State Prison before full release to general population elsewhere. The department's press releases describe the program as a success, citing reduced assaults on staff and a steady trickle of men exiting long-term isolation. Yet independent evaluations paint a more complex picture. The ACLU of Virginia and the University of Virginia School of Law's clinic have collected affidavits from participants who say the packets are repetitive, the reviews arbitrary, and the incentives easily revoked. One prisoner told researchers in 2018, "It's like playing a game where they keep moving the finish line." Still, for some, the program offered the first real hope in years. NPR's 2016 segment profiled a man who had spent nearly a decade in segregation at Red Onion and was finally allowed to walk outside without restraints during recreation. "I felt like I'd forgotten what fresh air was," he said. Another wrote in a letter to a Virginia legislator that simply being able to speak to another inmate face-to-face felt like being human again. Mental survival techniques became a crucial part of the step-down journey. Prisoners who made progress often adopted strict daily regimens, reading religious texts, completing GED workbooks, or practicing mindfulness to stay calm during cell inspections. Chaplains and volunteer mentors played a small but important role, delivering lesson packets, listening through food slots, or advocating for clearer review dates. One former prisoner later told the Roanoke Times that writing letters to his children, even when they went unanswered, was the only thing that kept me from losing my mind. The risk of regression remained high. Any outburst, covering a window, refusing to cuff up, or shouting across the tier, could send an inmate back to the bottom of the program, erasing months of progress. Corrections officers argued this was necessary to maintain order. Critics countered that the stress of prolonged isolation made such infractions almost inevitable. Court records from Porter v. Clark and subsequent monitoring reports show that dozens of men cycled up and down the step-down ladder for years without ever reaching release. Outside observers have noted that Red Onion's step-down program coincided with a broader national reevaluation of supermax prisons. States from Colorado to Mississippi have sharply reduced their use of long-term solitary confinement, citing both cost and public safety concerns. Virginia has made incremental changes: more out-of-cell time for mentally ill prisoners, clearer review policies. But Red Onion remains emblematic of an older philosophy: total control as a means of managing violence. Yet even here, a quiet culture of mutual support has begun to sprout. Men who successfully complete a phase sometimes shout encouragement through the vents to those still stuck below. A few prisoners have formed informal study groups across cells, working on the same lesson packets at the same time so they can discuss them later during recreation. In rare cases, staff have taken notice and recommended early advancement for inmates who mentor others. The contrast between those who step down and those who break down is stark. A 2019 report by the Vera Institute of Justice found that prisoners who remained in solitary more than 3 years were significantly more likely to develop mental health crises or accumulate new charges even after release. By contrast, those who completed Virginia's step-down program and re-entered lower security settings had fewer disciplinary issues and higher rates of program participation. This chapter marks a turning point in our story. The first 2 chapters showed Red Onion as a fortress of violence and isolation. Chapter 3 reveals the narrow, uncertain path out, a system that can offer hope but also dash it in an instant. For the men inside, the question is no longer just how do I survive, but how do I prove I'm no longer who they think I am? Their answers shape the rare success stories and the many silent struggles still unfolding behind the prison's concrete walls. For most men at Red Onion, there is no classroom, no yard of grass, and no cafeteria chatter. The only social contact comes in fragments: a guard's command, a nurse's question, the echo of another prisoner's voice through steel and concrete. Yet out of this sensory deprivation has grown an improvised communications network that is both lifeline and liability. NPR's 2016 investigation quoted several former prisoners describing vent talking as the supermax's underground radio. Air ducts link cells on a tier like hidden hallways, carrying whispers across dozens of feet. Some men press their ears to the metal grates, learning to distinguish voices by accent or cough. "We were like bats in a cave," one recalled. Others develop coded knocks or coughs to signal, "I'm here," or "stop talking." Guards know it happens. Disciplinary reports call it disruptive noise, but can rarely trace who is speaking. Alongside vent talk, kite lines are another staple. Prisoners twist bed sheets into ropes, attach toothpaste-tubed notes, and slide them under the door, fishing until a neighbor snags it with his own line. Through this method, inmates trade everything from legal citations to commissary coffee packets to warnings about staff searches. Former staff interviewed anonymously by the Virginian pilot admitted confiscating miles of string and notes, but one said he occasionally left harmless kites alone because, if they're talking, they're not fighting. These small acts of connection can be acts of defiance. Red Onion's official rules classify unauthorized communication and item passing as disciplinary infractions. A prisoner caught with contraband or shouting through vents risks losing his step-down progress or his single hour of recreation. Yet, many weigh the risk against the psychological cost of total silence. As one man wrote in a letter to a prisoner rights group, "I'd rather get a charge than go crazy." Communication also allows micro-societies to form inside the supermax. Former gang members told the Roanoke Times they continued to mentor younger recruits through the vents, teaching codes of conduct meant to limit random violence. Others used the system to pass along religious or educational materials. A volunteer chaplain recalled sliding folded Bible studies through the slot to one inmate, who then copied verses by hand and kited them to others down the tier. Even officers have noted that these networks can sometimes reduce tension. In an internal training memo obtained by lawyers in the Porter v. Clark case, one sergeant wrote that allowing limited inmate communication may lower incidents of spontaneous aggression compared to total sensory deprivation. Still, the official stance remains prohibition. Beyond the walls, families and advocacy groups amplify those muffled voices. Organizations such as the Virginia Interfaith Center and Solitary Watch publish excerpts of prisoner letters, bringing glimpses of life inside Red Onion to the public. Through these channels, stories have emerged of men teaching themselves Spanish or legal writing, composing poetry, or organizing exercise routines cell to cell. These narratives counterbalance the stereotype of the worst of the worst and show how, even in extreme isolation, people strive for self-improvement and contact. Yet the stakes are severe for misjudging the line between connection and conflict. Kites can carry threats as easily as greetings. Vent talk can escalate disputes as well as soothe them. Human Rights Watch documented several incidents where coded messages set up ambushes during transport or recreation, leading to injuries and new charges. This double-edged nature of communication reflects the broader paradox of Red Onion, a place built to suppress violence, but structured in ways that can perpetuate it. For prisoners focused on eventual release, the challenge is to harness these networks for support without triggering disciplinary backlash. Some develop reputations as tier elders, men who mediate disputes through the vents, encourage others to complete step-down packets, and quietly pass along mental health tips like deep breathing exercises. A handful of such prisoners have been cited by name in court filings as examples of successful adjustment. This chapter is where the texture of daily survival emerges most clearly. Beyond the official policies and lawsuits, there is an invisible layer of human ingenuity threading through Red Onion's concrete. The vent whispers, the kite strings, the shouted math lessons between cages, all are evidence of a stubborn refusal to let isolation erase community. For viewers on the outside, these details offer a more nuanced picture. Even inside Virginia's harshest prison, solidarity and small victories persist in the cracks of control. Red Onion State Prison was built to contain violence, and for more than 2 decades, it has done exactly that, but at a profound cost. Investigative reports, court filings, and first-hand accounts show a system where even routine mistakes can mean years of isolation, and where survival depends on ingenuity as much as compliance. Through vents, kites, whispered lessons, and strict mental routines, men create tiny islands of humanity inside a fortress designed to erase it. Some eventually step down, re-enter lower security units, or rebuild lives on the outside. Others remain trapped in the cycle of segregation and discipline, their stories largely unheard except through letters and rare interviews. Each voice from behind those concrete walls reminds us that punishment and public safety are not the same as rehabilitation, and that the conditions we tolerate in supermax prisons echo far beyond their razor wire. If this documentary has shown anything, it is that survival at Red Onion is not just about enduring punishment, but about clinging to identity, connection, and hope under some of the harshest conditions in the American prison system. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Behind Bars TV for more true stories from inside the world's toughest prisons.